Welcome to Flipping the Table. In this episode, Michael has a conversation with two farmers producing meat from their regenerative farms, one in Sonoma County and one in Marin. They will share their challenges faced and solutions discovered in their work to make small local regenerative meat production viable. Enjoy the show.
Meat. So many people I know think meat is the problem, that cows are bad and meat must be eliminated from the diet. If you've listened to past episodes, you will know I do not believe good science supports the idea that cows and meat are the problem. Saying cows and meat are bad fails to acknowledge that the real enemy is us. Yes, humans have designed industrial meat systems that are the root cause of many problems. It is not the cows and not the meat. The industrialized fake meat companies are promoting the idea that meat is the problem because it will make them rich. The reality is very much more complex. An alternative meat economy is emerging that I believe one day will supplant the unsustainable human-conceived industrial meat complex that depends upon lots of fossil fuel and toxic chemicals, releases greenhouse gases, and overuses water. Not to mention that industrial meat plants are the source of too many worker injuries and low wages. Finally, the industrial meat complex utilizes immense feedlots that confine cattle and metal sheds that confine poultry and hogs. These systems are very stressful on the livestock and poultry that we consume. Clearly, the industrial meat system needs to be replaced. Today, we're going to hear from two practitioners of the emerging regenerative meat economy. They work with nature and allowed their animals to live in accord with their instincts evolved over millions of years. The small scale of their operations in a time of climate chaos means these producers face immense challenges, but also continually discover solutions that are better for the animals, the ecosystem, and for people. I am joined by Sarah Silva. She is the owner-operator of Green Star Farm, an 85-acre pasture-based livestock farm in Sebastopol, California. Prior to beginning her career in farming and ranching in 2007, Sarah was the program manager for a NASA education and public outreach group through Sonoma State University and was a physics major in college. Her science background and ability to write grants and carefully track data has served her well. She is currently an executive board member and the treasurer of the Bay Area Ranchers Cooperative, or BAR-C, which you will soon hear about. Guido Frosini is also a member of BAR-C and is the owner-operator of True Grass Farms in West Marin County. He farms on land that has been in his extended family since 1867, and True Grass has been producing food since 2011. Guido was born and raised in Florence, Italy, and moved to the San Francisco Bay Area at 19 to attend college. He studied theology, philosophy, and then, to earn some money, began to work on his aunt's ranch. This led him to study sustainable agriculture, which then led to development of his own meat and agritourism business, which he operates with his wife. Let's begin the conversation. Welcome, Sarah and Guido. So glad to have you here in my home in Sonoma County. Guido had to drive from Marin, and Sarah had to drive from Sebastopol. So really glad to have you guys here. We're going to talk challenges first. But before we get to that, I want to hear about each of your operations. So Sarah, why don't you describe your farming operation?
My name is Sarah Silva. I am the rancher operator of Green Star Farm in West Sonoma County, Sebastopol, California. We are an 85-acre, rotationally, holistically grazed pasture operation. We produce pork, goat, lamb, and chicken eggs, all through the year. We sell directly to consumers and also through our local feed cooperative.
That's great. And it's 85 acres, you said. How long have you been farming?
I have been farming since 2008. Next month will be my 13th, 14th month, 15th year. Geez,
wow.
I guess I'm
it's
getting up there. It happens really fast.
Flies fast. Great. Okay. Guido, How about you? Please describe your operation, True Grass Farms.
Hey, Michael. Guido Frosini, True Grass Farms. We are located out in Tamales. It's home base. We manage approximately 850 acres, 3 different ranches. We are ecological grazers. We provide primarily proteins from beef, and we also diversify in a little bit of lamb. We have some goat. Those are usually used for fire mitigation purposes, and then we sell the meat as a byproduct, if you may. And then we have egg layers, and we offer camping out in Tamales. So people can experience the sense of agriturismo kind of that you can experience in Italy, where you can come and have the products of the land while experiencing and enjoying the land as well.
Great. The new agriculture is what I would call it. It's what's emerging everywhere, I think, in really beautiful ways, allowing people to get connected directly to the sources of their food. So let's talk challenges. And Sarah, why don't you start? So tell me the challenges that you faced 13 years in, 85 acres, very specialized operation, direct. What are the challenges for you?
Well, they've changed slightly throughout the years. For the most part, it's been focused around the same issues. Most of the issues are processing and packaging of our products and the ability to sell our animals directly to consumers by the pound, because that's what they're used to, versus selling whole animals from the farm, which is sort of a non-traditional way in our current market to buy an animal. So basically, throughout the years, even from the very beginning, we had a difficult time processing poultry in Sonoma County. The year that I started selling poultry and producing broiler meat chickens, our Sonoma County poultry processor that was available for small plants shut down and moved out of the state, I believe. I believe they went to like Nevada or something to that effect. So we had to figure out very quickly, as we were just starting a small business, to figure out how we're going to process the poultry. In fact, we ended up working under the exemption of processing the birds on our own. So that's sort of how I started out with my business partner, Mark Felton, and I. We both started actually a mobile trailer that we could use at our ranches, and we shared each other's, time by processing with each other on the weekends and getting volunteers to help us. That was the first way we could do it. That was not sustainable. It's not an economical solution because the cost of processing on the farm is just too high. I mean, it's not like a facility that you walk into a room that's clean and you have to actually set up every day. And the time it's
not efficient.
It was not efficient. I mean, we were paying sometimes $8 to $10 per bird just to get them harvested at the farm because of all the expenses, the ice, we don't, you don't have a flash freezer on a farm. So, that was one of the first bottlenecks. Then the other thing was just getting hogs harvested in Sonoma County. That was impossible until I think it was probably 2012, when what is now Marin Sun Farm started harvested, which was then Rancho, started harvesting hogs. So for a long time, we were driving to Orland to harvest hogs, or sometimes.
Which is how many miles from Sonoma County?
Well, it's about a 6-hour drive haul with my trailer.
Jeez.
Is what it was. Working out.
That's exhausting. And you drive back the same day?
Yeah.
That's 12 hours plus the harvest time.
Yeah. Well, the harvest time's pretty close. I don't have to sit there. I mean, pretty much you drop the animals off and you leave.
Okay.
It's just, bigger batches of animals is what that means. You can't take 1 or 2 or 4. You have to really make it economically viable. Not to mention the wear and tear on your vehicles and your trailer and the stress of the animals and all of the other, emotional and carbon footprint issues we deal with these long hauls with our animals. Then, as we went through, we finally had the opportunity to harvest all red meat in Sonoma County. That was amazing. That really was a game changer for my farm, because finally I could produce pork, goat, lamb in Sonoma County and have it produced.
And Rancho did it all.
And Rancho did it all, and I had it cut and wrapped in Sonoma County. It was great.
Wow.
Although there was cut and wrap problems too at that point. I mean, then I couldn't.
Cut and wrap is just for people. There's the slaughter facility that ends the animal's life, and then you have to take it to a place where it's cut up and packaged.
Right. So when we aren't having problems with having our animals harvested, we were having problems with getting them cut and wrapped. And then there's all these rules about packaging and this and that and the other and labeling and so anyway. it's always been an uphill struggle.
Those
and
are two
for years,
huge pieces.
we have been at the mercy of all of these other entities trying to succeed and accommodate the small producer, but they really haven't been able to. We've really had to. Finally, it took a long time. I mean, I've been on meetings for the last 10, 13, I guess it's actually 15 years now, just trying to find how we can get accessible processing for the small producers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. That's a good start. Let's go there. So Guido, do you have a similar set of problems?
So I started with managing a cow-calf operation. Mm-hmm. So that was 14 years ago when I first came here to help family out. And it wasn't until I was allowed to slaughter one of our animals to start my own business that I realized the complexities around, animal harvest and the costs associated with that, and the complexities of a capitalist system that, for efficiency's sake, starts dividing up tasks to make them more efficient. But then these entities become very efficient just at that task without understanding the other bottlenecks that happen, because there's no communication between these very efficient systems. And so in the last 12 years, the learning lesson of how does a cut and wrap work? Why is it, so hard to get a space in there? What volume is necessary to be even somebody answering the phone? So you have a space, talking about labeling, and there's no education around this. So it's been an incredible learning experience over the 12 years. And I think I am so happy that we have a local, now cooperatively owned slaughterhouse, Bar C, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, because it is helping solve that issue of hyper specialization, and it comes with a little lack of efficiency, but for the animal's sake, it is so much more slower as a pace, and therefore there's just more time for producer, animal, worker, and cooperative in general, but also a rural system to function with ease than having all these market pressures. For example, in Marin Sun Farms, the one of being so close to a city now that the city's expanding. So traditions die off pretty fast, it seems like. I'm seeing the die off of the past generation here in Petaluma, just here in California. And so now here we are, the next generation that's trying to maintain some semblance of new tradition that is a little more consistent with the type of climate that we are experiencing, that makes it even harder for producers like ourselves, and also to inform and have a more transparent education with our consumers and our customer base, so they can see how hard and how complex the process is to bring local food to a table.
Well, that's about them understanding the value, right? What is the true value of this? Because it is a very complex and difficult thing. So you touched on it. Let's talk about the drought. I mean, before we started, you were mentioning to me what you're going through right now. So let's talk about that. You can start with that, Guido, and then we'll go to you, Sarah, and see what it's like for you.
Well, just in the last 12 years, I have experienced extreme variability in weather. But at first, it was every 4 or 5 years. And now these smaller cycles are getting closer together. So it seems like geologically we go through these macro droughts in California, but now these micro droughts are happening much more frequently with storm intensities that we have never felt before, at least on record. So that given, something is shifting, the winds are stronger.
Yesterday, my God, it's crazy.
And our agriculture has not shifted, both in support from our government office to a local level, but then on a mindset level, I'm how much does it really cost to produce? And how do we continue attracting people, if not just especially younger people, to do this very intensive work, because we need intensive management for the properties that we are left now. The fertility has gone from California than what it was back in the 1700s. How do we regenerate these landscapes through proper food production and an attractive and a culture that wants to support this type of management?
Okay, Sarah, why don't you talk a little bit about what it's like you have a nice well on your property, I've seen.
Yeah, we're blessed with water. I mean, but that's still, and interesting enough, that doesn't mean we don't see an impact from the extreme temperature and extreme weather events that we're dealing with. And this climate scientists had been warning us. I'd been going to conferences long before I started to really see the evidence of the climate change and how it's going to impact us actually on our everyday basis. I had no idea how much it was going to impact my business in such a serious way. We have many years of raising animals under our belt, but every year we're learning something new and having to make a new decision and a pivot to make our operations successful in the way that we're sort of upholding to our principles, which are, increasing soil fertility and microbiology of the soil and the health of the environment that we steward. Mm-hmm. And that's been very difficult because what also happens and what is happening is costs in other areas are going up. So we're dealing with costs of feed going up. We're dealing with my hay field. I didn't even have a chance. I couldn't sell any of my hay last year. I had to keep it all for my animals. That hay is actually part of my income. And now it's just part of my forage backup. Yeah, because there was, even though we do rotational grazing, it just, there's too much unpredictability mm-hmm. in the weather now. I had to have some kind of a safety net. And mm-hmm. so putting all my hay in the barn was my safety net. And it's the best I can do. So, yeah, I think the biggest thing with the drought, fire, pandemic, is learning to pivot, learning to be adaptable. And, the animals teach us that in many ways. And you're sort of forced to be adaptable with animals and patient and all this. So it comes with the job, but I think it's challenging. It has been quite an interesting challenge. And I mean, my entire operation is totally different than it was before 2019, just because of all the environmental impacts on how I've had to change my operation, not being able to handle going to farmers markets because, some good majority of them get shut down because of smoke days, or flood days or whatever it is. So COVID. Yeah, right. I mean, I actually left the markets before COVID because fortunately it was an unintentional good choice. Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious now, Guido, would you talk a little bit about some of the other challenges? One thing that's interesting to me is the kind of anti-meat temperament that is growing around the world. And I don't know if you saw last week, they had a hearing at the legislature about a law that's potentially coming in, and an animal rights activist cemented their hand to the table because they wanted to, disrupt the hearing of the Ag Committee. So I'm just, do you guys experience that? Is that anything that you worry about, or is that not in your consciousness as a problem?
So I see this issue being brought up, the same with civil liberties. I think we need to be, and I say we as people, we always need to have extremes in order to find a middle ground. And so I think I welcome that conversation and that pushback. I tend to disagree with panaceas and where all meat is good. I disagree with that. I don't think all grazing animals are managed properly. So there's a lot of improvement to be had. And if that's the case and nobody's willing to improve and we can blame market forces or just cultural mentality, then I don't think we should support that. So in a way, I think we should boycott systems that don't function anymore in society. I do believe in supporting systems that are more resilient. An example of that, people were coming in the first year of the pandemic to us looking for food. And we're like, yes, we're a farm. That's how it works. Unfortunately, the majority of those people, now that it's more convenient to shop at a grocery store, have gone back to that. And that is, I think, what we deal with on just an energetical level of wanting to be valued, being a small scale, more resilient rural economy, and also being forgotten so fast after a disaster or after a pandemic. And so, that shift is going to happen slowly as smaller farms will be more resilient. And I look forward to, having more of those conversations. So when we look at how much water goes in to vegetable production versus grazed animals in landscapes that are appropriate for those animals, it's night and day. Mm-hmm. There is so much less water need. And that is something going back to how much water.
Which is not the common perception.
No.
The common perception is that beef uses way too much, particularly beef of the animal, uses way too much water. But what you're saying is if you're doing a rotational, ecologically intelligent grazing operation, you're not using that kind of water, that immense amount of water.
No, because you're also at the mercy of how much water is falling.
Right.
So yes, it's not as effective at producing food, but there are other species that will come in, and because of the management of one species that's being marketed, the other species are thriving because there's habitat being put in, because there's other project in combination to that production of food.
So give us a living example of that. Describe that more.
So for example, in our home base in the last 5 years, we've planted over 2,000 trees. And if I were to have managed animals, beef in this case, conventionally, those trees would have been gone because, cows love to rub on things. Mm-hmm. And so because we use electric fences and we can rotate, we can place animals where we need them at the right time. That allows us to also keep them out of certain areas. And that could be riparian areas at the wrong time. It could be off our hedgerows that we planted. We've done silvopasture.
Describe silvopasture.
Silvopasture is a less densely populated forest, so there's always light in between the trees. Think of the Dehesa in Spain, where cork oak is being grown, and there used to be sheep until sheep wasn't productive as much. Or
now they're
lucrative.
Pigs.
Yeah, now there's pigs because those legs are going.
Jamon, delicious jamon.
So it's just how do we rethink systems working with each other and synergistically. So the effort that I'm putting in for my generation is that in the future, there'll be oak trees tall enough to withstand grazing, but also provide forage, shade, and other food for wildlife. That is going to take 50 years. We have taken for granted California fertility since the time of the thriving indigenous population management in California. We thought we were great farmers because California was one of the most fertile areas in the world. Now that is dwindling.
Right.
Inputs are costing more.
Right.
Alternatives are necessary. Agriculture, the way it has been, was an interesting experiment.
Yeah, the system's falling apart, kind of the edges. So you want to jump in here, Sarah? And what are you thinking based on what we're talking about here?
Yeah, there's just so many different things. I mean, I think one, back to your question about what are specific benefits about, grazing animals and how it can reduce water, just grazing in the right time of the year, keeping the grass growing, the roots growing as well, not grazing so hard that the roots are stunted or shocked. That alone.
Because grazing stimulates growth if it's done right.
Correct. And also fertilizes. And
right.
also even the saliva is beneficial to the pastures. That alone can capture more water. So we can actually capture more water with better roots. And if we have good topsoil and we build our topsoil, we can really hold that in. So
we capture carbon.
And we capture carbon. As regenerative ranchers, I mean, I like to aspire to be a regenerative rancher. I feel like I'm still working towards that. As much as I've been doing this for as long as I have, I just, it's a hard nut to crack. And it's an evolving and ever learning process, but the other thing about regenerative ranching and this idea of holistic grazing and really managing it in a much more hands-on way, we're also not disturbing habitat 365 days a year. We're disturbing habitat a couple times a year, and those disturbances are welcomed in nature. And if you have different types of animals, you can utilize those animals in a beneficial way, depending on what kind of land you're working on. Like, riparian corridors, there's a lot of growth in those, and people tend to ignore them. And then we get huge fires in California, and those things start going up. Mm-hmm. Goats and sheep are pretty good for that at the right time of the year, but you don't really want them on it when they can cause erosion. So there's just very minor things. Ground birds, things like that. I mean, I hate that I even have to cut a hayfield. I'm still trying to figure out how to work around that, because I want to make sure the birds and the snakes and the reptiles have a little home and I'm not disturbing them.
Mm-hmm. Good.
We hope you're enjoying the conversation. If you are, please rate our podcast and offer a review. Your voice will help us grow our listener base, which helps us sustain the funding to share these conversations with the people and organizations shaping a more just and regenerative future. A future in which the food and farm businesses are helping to solve the largest challenges of our time.
So this is what just really strikes me about the generation of farmers that you two represent, which is that there is so much more nuanced understanding of the biological need of the environment in which you're working. The ecosystem needs humans to interact with it in a certain way, like the indigenous people did, because they had to. We have now tools and science and understandings that have, maybe give us some advantages for the repair work that needs to be done, because a lot of repair needs to be done, and you're both involved in repair work. I want to actually start to shift us to solutions, because you've been getting into your response to the environmental. We talked about the droughts and the fires, and you're responding to the environmental crisis that's before us. And it seems to me that you guys are situated to be more resilient than a conventional farming operation that isn't thinking in the same way, really trying to create the synergies for long-term health. So I'm going to play a little excerpt here from an event that you guys hosted, actually, Bar C, which we're going to get into, which is your processing operation now. The Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory at USDA, Jenny Lester Moffitt, who's a California gal, who was the Undersecretary or Deputy Secretary here in California at the California Department of Food and Ag before she moved on to USDA and grew up on an organic walnut farm. We're going to just hear an excerpt from a little interview I did with her at the opening ceremony of your processing facility. So I am with Jenny Lester Moffitt, who is the Undersecretary for Ag Marketing and Regulatory Programs at the USDA, former Deputy Secretary of California Department of Food and Ag. And I'm here with her at the opening of the Bar C mobile slaughter plant. And I just have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
The first is, we're really excited about all the $1 billion that is being invested by USDA in the establishment of more independent meat sources,
Yes.
processing. There have been concerns that that money will not get to the smallest producers or processors in the country. What is your thought on that? How do you think you're going to avoid that problem that people are concerned about?
Yeah, I think the key thing is a multitude of things, right? So funding is really important, but funding is part of that. We need to make sure that the funding is arranged in a way that is meeting the needs of processors from all sizes, scales, backgrounds as well. We've got grant funding, so $375 million in grant funding. We're going to be rolling that out in 2 phases. And key to that grant funding is not just, funding more regional independent processors, but also small processors. We want to make sure it's scale appropriate for whatever the region is. So small processors can apply for that funding as well as regional. But key to me, just based on my background and what I've learned over the years, is how important technical assistance is for grant writing, for being able to secure that funding, for being able to implement the grant. So we'll dedicate, we have $50 million that we've dedicated for technical assistance as well as research and innovation.
Great.
And so we'll have technical assistance providers for small producers to be able to pull together the grant application and do the work that they need to do to be able to access the funds.
So let's just think 4 or 5 years down the line after this program has been implemented. What do you hope to see in the United States, in California, your home state? What do you hope to see have resulted?
I hope we get to see the diversity and the beautiful diversity that we already have in American agriculture reflected in the meat process and poultry processing industry. So I hope that we see processors from all sizes being economically viable, being not just economically viable, but prosperous in supporting not only the producers, but also consumers who are demanding and really interested in knowing where their meat and poultry is coming from. So I hope that we see really a vibrant meat and poultry processing industry in all scales, especially small, especially mid-sized, especially regional and local producers, so that people have more choices. Ranchers have more choices to bring their animals to processing. They have more choices in where they're going and what they're doing and how it's being processed. So more, better, fairer markets is the key thing that we're aiming for.
Great. That's good to hear. We'll do all we can. I think the state of California will work with us. We're even down here at the local level really struggling with the local regulation to get things done. You may remember Jim Reichert, the duck farmer from Sonoma County. He bought an old plant, trying to get it up and running, but it's local regs that are causing a problem around water, wastewater. So it's a complex problem, and I think it will take 5 or more years really to resolve all the issues that harm the ability of consumers. But what the federal government's doing, in my mind, is the first great step, and that will create momentum.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming out here to California again, coming back to your hometown.
It's so nice to be home and in California. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm curious. What did you think of that, Guido? What do you think of the Undersecretary's comments? It sounds pretty big, like they're going to invest $1 billion, but is it enough?
I never think it's the amount. It's like how it is then being used. One of the biggest concern usually is like what small scale means and how it's categorized, and the technical, advisors, are they actually getting feedback, or is it just teaching us how to play their game? Because I think that's like, this is our government and it should be in function of us. And so I would hope there is more like a public comment process on how these programs are being unrolled. And too often they're unrolled in good intent, but without understanding the actual needs of smaller plants. And I say this now that Bar C's been open for business for over 2 months and working with the USDA FSIS, the Food Security
Inspection
Service. And they are geared for food safety, not food health necessarily, not food diversity, not cultural biodiversity, just literally just safe food for very large plants. And that's what they're used to dealing with. And we are different. And so that is where I like what the secretary said, but I would love to hear more on how they might want to inform process for these newer, smaller plants that are a different animal altogether.
Mm-hmm. Good. That's good. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I thought Jenny's meeting her was awesome. She's great. I loved what she had to say. Mm-hmm. My biggest fear is accessibility to the small business owners, and which are the small farmers and ranchers. We don't have the bandwidth to do barely anything. We are at the mercy of the weather and our livestock and our whatever we are raising, our crops. As Guido mentioned, FSIS, one of the biggest, hurdles we're finding out right now is a lot of these FSIS people are being trained for the larger plants, and they're so used to the regulations, or not the regulations, but the way they write their operations and their procedures and all their different paperwork that's required of them. However, the minutia is that they have very different expectations, which are not really reasonable in a small plant, and they're not even required according to law. It's just they're so used to it that they've been adopted as a requirement, and it's difficult. So,
Have they invited any of you to be part of any kind of advisory committee to the USDA to help them solve those kinds of problems? Have you heard anything about that?
No, I haven't. That wouldn't be something I think someone would ask me. That's not my forte. I would be more into the ranching side of things and so on, and the business side of the Bar C. The accessibility for underserved people and farmers, and just grant writing is very difficult. And even I, having had grant writing experience in my previous career, still have.
It's a challenge.
It's so time consuming.
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah,
It's
it means going home at 8 o'clock at night, trying to read through all the requirements and answer these questions, and they're technical. And it's
hard.
Bandwidth is hard.
Yeah, I get it. Let's talk about Bar C. So Bar C stands for the Bay Area Ranchers Cooperative. You guys put it together for small. We actually did a show on it, maybe a year and a half ago, when you were just starting to raise money, and I invested a very small amount, but I did invest, because I want to see it. I want to see it go, and I was really grateful that you guys invited me to your opening event. Why don't you, Sarah, describe what it is, and then Guido, I want you to describe how it works for you. Why it works for you. So go ahead, Sarah. Describe what is Bar C.
Yeah, so Bar C is the Bay Area Ranchers Cooperative. It's a California agricultural producers cooperative. Let's see if I can get my tongue untwisted there. And we are a group of 39 members, rancher members of Northern California. And there was 16 founding members in 2020 that came together. right after our local processing facility shut down.
Right.
Not shut down, but shuttered its doors to the small producers. They actually kept producing. We were no longer welcomed, I guess is the question. We banded together. There was a steering committee, the Musk Group, which I believe Guido was part of that group. They wrote a business plan. I jumped on in July once I saw what was going on. I'm the treasurer of the board. And, we started this cooperative, and we have processed over 200 animals as of today, or as of yesterday, basically.
Great.
And so it's been a really interesting process. But now we all have this co-op, and we no longer burden to just one owner for our processing. We all have a say in it. And as a collaborative group, it's been fun working with a lot of ranchers and getting this up and running. And, it's 20 minutes from my farm.
I was going to say, it's not a 6-hour drive now each way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. So Guido, tell us about how it's working for you.
I am located 5 minutes west of the plant, so it's a dream come true. It allows me now to also think differently of my operation because I can manage with a difference of species depending on the year. So maybe if we continue having a drought, I'll start raising pigs because I can process pigs close by and not have to drive them 6 hours. So it allows much more resilience in the community. The other one, we are all member owners. And so we have a say. We don't just get shut out. So we can rely on a service that is paramount for small operations. The next one is we actually get to have a conversation with the USDA regarding different pieces of the puzzle. So if I want my heads back, or if I want some of my animal parts, I am still an owner of my animal. And this is something new. Before, it just is, it's a product. It's something it becomes almost this object that goes through. There's a life force now that can stay with it. And there's an argumentative way of us being able to have a conversation with this entity, the USDA. So to me, one of the biggest things that we produce this amazing meat and we throw away the rest like it's not fertility or product that can be put back onto the soil. I mean, phosphorus, nitrogen, these are all things that just go into the landfill. And people don't realize that.
Right.
And because of the specialization. And so it opens up opportunities for us to create precedent for other smaller plants. And that's something that I'm really excited about.
Great. And so there are 39 members. And what's the footprint, the geographic footprint? I mean, how far north, how far south, east? Not too much west because you're on the coast, but how far north? Like, do we know what the farthest north ranch is? How far it is? It's not 6 hours.
No, I think the furthest ranches are in Mendocino County.
Okay.
And I think furthest south is San Mateo County. I think that's sort of the breadth of it.
That's cool.
Yeah, it really goes. I mean, it really spans, except we're getting emails from people in the Sierras. I mean, we're getting people from all over Northern California because of it's a better drive. I mean, Eureka is the closest plant that pretty much does what our plant does.
Right.
And that's, how many hours is Eureka? Is that
it's
8?
A long, it's 6. No, it's 6. Well, in a car.
With a trailer, right,
yeah, in
right.
a trailer,
I think with a trailer it's 8. Yeah, so you always add an hour to an hour and a half.
Right, that's right. Wow.
Yeah, and I was going to add about Bar C. One other thing that we're doing right now is we wrote what's called a valued added producer grant.
Yes, good.
And we were awarded the grant. And the grant is, we're working on this with the California California Center for Cooperative Development, CCCD.
At UC Davis.
Yes, that's correct. And there we are. The grant is a feasibility study for small plants for their byproduct.
Oh, good.
Finding better waste streams that are economical so that we're not just disposing of everything and paying for the disposal of it, because it's quite expensive, just the rendering and all that stuff. Even getting a hide to the hide tannery is extremely complicated and expensive. So the feasibility study, the goal is to not necessarily have a revenue source for Bar C, but to cut the costs by producing something like collagen or fertilizer or a dog food or, maybe just hides. So trying to find some methods and streams for the smaller plants, because the larger plants make a large amount of money on their byproducts. Right. But there's systems in place for the larger plants to do that. There are no systems in place for the small plants that are economical.
Yes, that's good. You sound very positive. I mean, are both of you feeling like, despite the drought, And despite what you said, Guido, about shrinking, some people are going back to the grocery store rather than buying from you because now that COVID's not as bad as it was. Although, let me just say this before we move on. I do think that if you look around the world at what's going on with weather, and if you look at the war in Ukraine and the likelihood of more things like that happening in the years ahead as water becomes more scarce, and supply chains are going to be disturbed. So it seems to me that there's probably going to be more and more people who are making commitments to local production. I mean, when you look ahead over the next 5 years, I asked the secretary this, what is it that you want to see happen in this community, in Sonoma Marin, the North Coast, among your members? What is that? How would you describe the state you'd like to see, the state of the industry, the state of your niche within the industry? How would you like to be able to describe it in 5 years?
Well, Michael, it's a hard but good question. And I think we all need more visioning statements like that. I envision different incentives, and those not just financial. An example of that, like if we are to enroll ecosystem service credits, I think each county that has these climate action plans should service some kind of credit on property taxes if the property owners are incentivized in proper management of the soil. We need to have cultural expectations of relational ecology where people actually, if they own land, as we say, have a responsibility to it, and not just to the land itself, but to all creatures that thrive with it. We need to have much more interface between nature and humans. At the moment, it's marginal. And it makes sense for efficiency's sake, but psychologically and health-wise, it's missing. I would like to see on a state or federal level food being recognized as the main primary source of healthcare for our people. Those are some of the first things I would like to see. 5 years is probably a little fast, but that direction.
Food as medicine has taken off. The whole concept of food as medicine, which you mentioned there at the end. And you guys are already practicing, predator-friendly farming systems. And, that's about relationship with the land and the animals, the critters. So Sarah, go ahead. What are you thinking?
For me, 5 years from now, I would, I sort of look at where my business's weaknesses are. Most of it has always been trying to sell the product, having a sales channel, which has changed over the years. Cooperatives, Green Star Farm and True Grass Farm is part of our feed cooperative, which is our sort of our marketing.
Describe that for people.
Right. So that's our marketing and our distributing company. And so I would really like to see.
It's called Feed Sonoma?
Feed Sonoma.
FEED Sonoma.
Can you say the feed?
It's Farmers Exchange of Earthly Delights.
Ah, good. I like it.
I always fall over that one. But yet, I have a lot of hope and faith that this model building up, it's really grassroots. All of our local ranchers and farmers have opportunities to band together and build a really good foundation so that we can support each other. And Feed Sonoma has done a really amazing job with that. Prior to COVID, they were selling majority of my eggs to restaurants in the Bay Area and chicken and pork. But once COVID hit, there were 30 cases of eggs for the restaurants and these large campuses like Google and so on and so forth, just sitting in the cooler. I had to turn them into market retail cases. So I had to repack them all. And now, the majority of my sales are all going through markets
grocery
or
stores.
Through what's called the Food Bin program, which is actually not only a CSA program for the general public, but also providing really awesome fresh food boxes, which include our eggs and probably sometimes some beef from True Grass Farms, and to food insecure people in Sonoma County.
That's great.
And I would like to see more of that in our community.
Is that through Farm to Pantry?
That's through Farm to Pantry. Actually, there's a couple different groups. There's Kathy Webster of Tomcat is working with Farm to, I can't remember her organization, but the Tomcat group and Farm to Pantry actually rallied for this. There's been a couple different rounds of funding to get this going, and now they're just going for different. I mean, they go sort of to different places to keep these food insecure communities in Sonoma County
fed with good food.
Fed with these. Yeah, I mean, the goal is right now, I think they were telling me it's something like 90 boxes a week, and they're trying to get to 300 boxes a week. I mean, for the small farmer to know that we have this secure revenue stream.
That'd be like
through our
300 dozen
cooperative.
eggs, right?
That's right. I mean, right. So, I mean, the fact that majority of my eggs now go to the feed bin program,
Wow.
which I love. I would
Yeah.
much rather them been going to households than to restaurants.
Yeah, I went to your farm the other day. Was about, I guess, right before you injured your knee. And I have to say, I saw the biggest eggs I've ever seen in my life. You have some big eggs. They're awesome. Yeah.
'Tis the season.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting towards the end here. We have a few minutes left, but I'm just curious about other thoughts that you have about, we didn't really talk, Guido, about your agritourism operation and the importance of that and how that works for you. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Like Sarah was mentioning, the ability for us to pivot on a dime is paramount on a small operation. And when we were selling to campuses, working with Bay Area campuses on whole animal programs, and the idea behind that was, again, talking about the relational ecology. Like, I have to murder an animal for you only to get steaks. That doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. We're going to work together, and the chef is going to be the other voice that's going to keep this life alive and feed people and nourish a community. So that was the intent behind whole animal programs. Nonetheless, COVID shut everything down. So most of our business was wholesale at that point. And so we had to pivot. And so we started selling steaks and opening up open air campsites and being able to have like a very primitive experience, but we had first time families come out. And so I realized, like, part of what we do is there's a marketing, but I think if there's an idea behind like wanting people to connect to good food, you can do that in a myriad of ways. And one thing is, like, with my Italian heritage, like focusing on quality and just really just making sure people are fed. So yes, our cows sell for, a high price, which is a fair price given the real estate market in Marin. But that being said, there's a high population density, and those that can't afford it, we feed them anyway, because part of what we do is grow food for our community. Like, that's one of our missions. Mm-hmm. So I think that's maybe gets sometimes disconnected in like the commodification of like an animal production system.
You mean people don't think about that?
We forget that farms feed people and aren't there just to produce food. Mm-hmm. That's, I think I want to underline that.
And when you say feed people, what you're saying is not just putting calories in the mouth. You are saying we're giving them something that has linkages to reality, is the way I think about it. Like, people are out of reality so much in so many ways about what it takes to raise an animal, or what the animal is doing in the environment, what the environment is doing to the animal and to the farm. I mean, the farm is a system, right? It's actually a system. It's an ecosystem. And people don't think that way at all about it because we have commodified. We're so separated. One of the things that's, you guys have been polite. You haven't used the word industrial agriculture or industrial meat production or meat factories at all. I talk about that a fair amount because the commodification that has led to the corn complex in the Midwest, or the grain and corn complex that feeds those animals and has so many impacts on the soil and then the water and on the air pollution. It's that commodification that's actually broken everything. It's broken it. And so I'm sustained by this conversation. I'm fed, going back to the idea. I'm fed by the conversation because it gives me hope. So do you feel like there are a lot more folks like you coming into this world? Do you see a flow of human beings that are becoming that next generation of farmer?
I would say a few years ago, I really saw that. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I started to really see an influx. Throughout my time, I've seen people start up and decide that it's too much for them, or it's just not the right thing for them. And I can commiserate on so many levels with those people. It takes a really, you said something about us being happy. We are eternal optimists. You have to be. And yes, we have bad moments all the time, but you have to just remember that, we're our own machine. We're our own, we work within our system, and we're going to, just find our weaknesses and try to improve our weaknesses in our system. The problem is with the industrial agriculture and the commodification of foodstuffs, it's so destructive, and it's become such a machine that, and it's so disjointed that it's hard to see that it could be put back together on a much more integrated, more beneficial thing for everyone. Mm-hmm. At every level of society. Mm-hmm. And that I think is.
So that's what you carry around and kind of worrisome and a worried part of your brain.
And it's hard, with the for example, the pork in California pork, California voted to change the standards of living for industrial pork. Of course, that doesn't really affect people like us raising pork because our pigs run, and even when they're not running in wide open pastures, they're still in very large spaces.
Right. I saw that.
Yeah,
at your place,
very large spaces. You know. So I mean, these things, but the pork thing has been, California pork law has been taken to the Supreme Court now. So and that's because the people who have the money get to make those decisions, not us.
Right. Guido, any thoughts?
I would agree with Sarah. I've seen a diminishing amount of that.
Do you think that's fires and COVID and drought?
Yeah, because it takes optimism. I think we're a little all disappointed in reality, to say the least, and morale is quite low, and it's hard to farm with low morale. I also think culturally, we are shifting away from that period of like the new generation of farmers. I felt like it was sexy to be a young farmer. And now I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm not a young farmer anymore. And the support's there. I feel extremely supported in what I've done so far. I just don't see that support continuing in the real estate market that happened the last 2 years in the boom with the interest rate, going up. So everybody was purchasing. Land has shifted hands. And again, land has shifted hands before local farmers could purchase, or it was only local farmers that have been there for 200 years. Like the redistribution of land access is completely still backwards. And the integration of people into farming is very hard because it doesn't allow, since we farm on shoestring budgets most of the time. So it's very hard to find equity and inclusion when it's very hard. So how do you merge those two? Is we need cultural shifts that facilitate that. So if it's the food to pantry program, or if it's other programs through county services, through the local resource conservation district to reconnect people and land and the ability for people to farm, because again, I want to reiterate, food doesn't need to be produced. Food is grown, food is nourished, and you need people to do so. When you produce food, you try to minimize the amount of people because it's more efficient. But efficiency isn't what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be effective at feeding people.
Right.
And I want to make that clear. And I think Bar C and Feed Cooperative are creating that possibility on a rural scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think, going back to this idea of, I think that one of the things that I do believe will happen, I think that there's going to be a revenue stream for ecosystem services coming. I think it's going to be essential. We've already started with the Healthy Soils program in California to provide grants to farmers that are capturing carbon. Right now, it's all pilot programs. So, they're basically studying what they can do, but it's up and running, and probably $100 million has flowed through that program already. So I think there's hope there. The federal government's considering it. We're involved right now in writing a grant for this partnerships, the Climate Smart Commodity Partnerships program, trying to get ranchers of many different scales, BIPOC farmers, getting into a system of being carbon capture farmers. So I think there's, they're putting, they've committed $1 billion USDA to that. So there is some hope out there. And you guys give me hope, as I said before. And so I'm going to just hand it to you for one final comment about what you want to leave the listeners with.
I think what to leave the listeners with is, support your local food shed. Find ways to get involved with your local food producers. Learn more about them. I mean, they say they get to know your farmer, know your rancher, but it's a little bit more than that. Start trying to integrate and, learn about these food cooperatives. Food cooperatives are an extremely great model, and also agricultural producer cooperatives. Even our poultry is produced at those. What I would say is encourage people to get to know all the people in your local food shed. Try to not eat foods that are out of season. Simple little things, and those things can go a long way.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I want to echo what Sarah was saying about connecting. Don't be scared of asking questions. That's how we learn. And I think a lot of us, even after 10 years, might think we have not learned much, but we have been in contact and in constant interaction with a system, an ecosystem. And so we actually have a lot that we have wandered about. and been amazed by, and are willing to share that healing experience, because I think a lot of us also have healed during this period, and something that interface with animals, landscape, and farming does create a sense of place. And a lot of us don't feel that we're part of a place. And that is one of the main steps of like creating culture that is meaningful. So
Be connected to a place.
yeah. And so, bringing indigenous voices back in, understanding how we speak and use language regarding land, regarding animals, like not talking about an animal as a product, not talking about land as owned. Like these are things that then skew the type of framework that then we apply on a reality. And then we find ourselves here. And it's just like, it's enjoyable, but this can't continue. So connect with us.
That's a good message. So I want to thank you both. It's been tremendous, and I know that I have a good feeling about your futures. I think you're going to make it, and in 10 years from now, we'll do this again, and we'll just hear about how your businesses have prospered. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to our sponsors, the Ladybug Foundation, Dan and Quincy Imhoff, Beth and Mark Wyatt, Cindy Daniel, and Doug Lipton. Roots of Change is a program of the Public Health Institute.